We are about to get incredibly toxic because we got to talk about head coaches that are coaching for their jobs entering the 2025 NFL season. Who could end up getting the pink slip at the end of this year? Starting off with Cincinnati Bengals head coach Zac Taylor. He is entering his 7th season. He's been to a Super Bowl. He's been to 2 AFC championships, winning one. But ever since their second AFC championship appearance, they have missed the playoffs for 2 consecutive seasons. And if they miss it again this year, without a doubt, it'll be his 3rd strike. He'll be up on out of there. And they already are at a disadvantage because they are allocating over 40% of their cap space to Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Joe Burrow. And if they pay Trey Hendrickson what he's asking for, then you'll have 4 players taking up over 50% of the salary cap, which would give the Bengals roughly around $1.2, $1.3 million to spend at their other starting positions on the rest of this team. And they are a bona fide 7-on-7 team. And yes, the Bengals defense did cost them a lot of games last year, but the year before that, when Joe Burrow went down, then they had Jake Browning at quarterback. They missed the playoffs that year. And yes, Joe Burrow getting injured does give Zac Taylor a little bit of breathing room, but Mike Tomlin has made it to the playoffs for 2 straight years with way worse quarterback play than what the Bengals have had out of Joe Burrow. So Zac Taylor has to get Cincinnati to the playoffs this year. I don't think it's going to happen. They don't have a complete team, and they essentially have to win games this year the same way they did last year, with their defense getting even worse, losing their leading tackler, Jermaine Pratt. Sam Hubbard retired, and you might not have Trey Hendrickson this year if you don't pay him, and you won't even pay the guy who you drafted to replace him, and Shamar Stewart. Mike McDaniel, his first 2 seasons started off really promising. He led the Miami Dolphins to back-to-back playoff appearances, but they underachieved relative to the amount of talent that they had going into those seasons. They have had some really good teams. They start out the season hot, but then once you get into the month of October, late November after Thanksgiving, when the real football season begins, when it starts to get cold and you got to be able to run the football, that's when the Dolphins end up folding. They never finish the season as strongly as how they come in starting the season. And this year, with the arrival of Mike Vrabel in New England, and then you also got Aaron Glenn and the Jets, who could be really interesting, there's a high chance that the Dolphins end up completely imploding. They miss the playoffs, and they finish in last place in the AFC East, which leads to Mike McDaniel getting fired. He's an incredible offensive mind, but the players just don't seem to respect him, and this team doesn't have the physicality necessary to win playoff football in the month of January. Shane Steichen, he was the guy who was responsible for Justin Herbert having that prolific rookie season. He also helped Jalen Hurts elevate his game to an MVP level when the Eagles first lost to Kansas City in the Super Bowl a few years ago. And when he took this job in year 1, they went 9-8. They were really close to getting into the postseason that year. And then last season, they went 8-9. So he hasn't completely bottomed out. But with how well the Colts have drafted, this is the year where it's playoff or bust. And with Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson being your best 2 options at QB1, not only do you risk missing the playoffs again, but you also risk being one of the worst teams in the NFL. And in year 3, having no playoff appearances, that would be his 3rd strikeout. And the Colts would be searching for a new head coach at the start of 2026. So it's playoffs or bust for not just Zac Taylor and Mike McDaniel, but Shane Steichen as well. Brian Daboll is in a really interesting situation because unlike the first 3 coaches on this list, I don't feel like it's necessarily playoffs or bust for him. Because the Giants, their owner has to be realistic. They have no chance in hell at realistically making it to the playoffs in arguably the toughest division in the NFL with the Commanders and the Eagles, who are both Super Bowl contenders, and also the Dallas Cowboys, who also have a really good roster and are a 10-win team on most occasions when they're playing at their best. And Brian Daboll, he drafted Jackson Dart, which I think gives him another year. If he can at least find a way to get the 7 wins, that should be enough to keep his job. And if you were to take the Giants out of the NFC East and you put them in the NFC South or the AFC South, they could easily win those divisions because they don't have a bad team. They actually have a pretty solid roster. The issue is that they just have a gauntlet of a schedule. This is one of the most difficult schedules in the history of the NFL. And I was going to pick the Giants to be my biggest sleeper team this year until the schedule came out. And I was struggling to find more than 4 or 5 wins on that thing. So they're going to have to pull a couple of upsets. But Brian Daboll, his first season as a head coach, he led them to the playoffs. They won the playoff game with Daniel Jones over the Minnesota Vikings. And it's just been downhill from there. They went 9-7-1 his first season. Then they won 6 games in his second year. And last year they only won 3. He has to find a way to get this team at least in contention to where they're fighting for a playoff spot for the majority of the year. And then they just get out-rostered. I think John Moore would have to consider giving him another season, especially when you invest the first-round pick in the Jackson Dart. You don't want to set his development back by giving him a new coaching staff and having to learn a new system. Todd Bowles, now unlike the other 4 coaches on this list, he's made it to the playoffs every season that he's been the head coach of the Buccaneers. He also has won his division every year as well. But the issue with Todd Bowles is that making it to the playoffs is expected. Winning the NFC South when you've had the most talented team in this division for the duration you've been a head coach doesn't earn you any brownie points. You are judged by what you do in the playoffs, and Todd Bowles is 1-3 in the playoffs. His only win came when the Bucs beat up on a depleted Philadelphia Eagles team 2 years ago. You lose to a rookie quarterback in Jaden Daniels. You lost to the Detroit Lions. Todd Bowles, he has to at least get the Buccaneers to the NFC Championship this year, because if not, he is essentially wasting a Super Bowl caliber roster. If you put a better head coach in this situation, that possibly could get this team back in the Super Bowl conversation. And nobody mentions the Buccaneers as Super Bowl contenders because of Todd Bowles. And if it wasn't for the Falcons choking during the second half of last season thanks to Kirk Cousins, he might have already gotten fired. So Kirk Cousins low-key saved Todd Bowles' job, at least for this season. But I think that runs out. He's on his 3rd offensive coordinator in 3 seasons. The chances of his 3rd OC still being as good as what his previous 2 were are incredibly slim to none. And his defenses aren't necessarily the greatest, and they aren't good, or they aren't well coached against good teams, especially in the 4th quarter. They had the worst record in what position games in the NFL last year. I think that Todd Bowles is a dead man walking in Tampa if they don't win a playoff game this year, or at least make it to the conference championship. Raheem Morris, he's in a similar situation to what Todd Bowles is, although he doesn't have to necessarily win a playoff game, but he has to make it to the playoffs. Last season, the Falcons were predicted to be a playoff team. They had a playoff caliber roster, but they underperformed because the defense was really bad. And when you specialize in a particular area of the football, and that happens to be the worst part of your team, it's a red flag about you as a head coach. The defense got carved up by Bo Nix. They got carved up by Bryce Young the final week of the regular season. And we all can't forget the awful clock management, which led them to losing to the Commanders in overtime in a game that they had to win to maintain control of the NFC South. And this year, if he doesn't get the Falcons to the playoffs, he definitely isn't going to get a 3rd season. And him and general manager Terry Fontenot are going to get the boot. And lastly, I have Arizona head coach Jonathan Gannon. He's going into his third season, and the Arizona Cardinals have improved every single season under him. His first season as the head coach, they went 4-13. Last year, they doubled their win total, going from 4-8. And there were a handful of games that they lost because they just choked in the final seconds, like against the Buffalo Bills early during last season. They were up on them big. Then the Bills came back from behind. If they can learn how to win the close games against good teams, this definitely should be a playoff team. They do have a team that's good enough to compete for a playoff spot in the NFC. You also have a talented quarterback in Kyler Murray, who has been really inconsistent at times, but the defense should be really good. And Jonathan Gannon is a really good defensive-minded coach. So if the Cardinals don't make it to the playoffs this year, depending on what their record is, if they miss it, being 9-8, that's understandable. But if they go 8-9 again, then maybe you start having discussions about him getting fired. But I don't believe that his seat is as hot as the other 6 coaches on this list. So let me know your guys' thoughts on the head coaches that I have on the hot seat that are coaching for their jobs entering this season. Who do you think is most likely to save their job, at least for another season? And who do you think is a guarantee to end up getting replaced at the start of next year?